So we're going to have them here this morning, and they're going to tell us a lot about what's going on in our church. I'm sure some of you have questions. You're interested in what the church is doing that we don't always sometimes know all about it, and they're going to fill us in. I think the world of these two, so welcome them, would you?
Thank you for such a kind and warm introduction, Kathy. We're happy to be here with you today. I always love to come and touch base with the challengers because you guys are such an important part of this congregation and have provided such support just through so many seasons. So I love to have a chance to share with you what we're doing and hear from you as well. So today, I want to give you a little update about what we've been doing in 2024. Some of it you've probably heard about. Some of it is not that interesting, so you probably haven't heard about it. But, you know, rewriting an employment policy doesn't really make a good photo op to put up on the screens in worship, but I want to give you some updates about that. And then I want to talk a little bit about some things we're thinking about for the future. Not because we have all the answers, but we want to share some information that we've been mulling over for a while and have a chance to hear from you what your thoughts might be as well. So we had 6 categories of initiatives for 2024, and these are the 6 categories. And under each one are different goals, and we've done a good job. I can't say that I'm sure, you know, on December 31st every single check mark will be done, but we've made a lot of progress this year. So I want to share just a little bit about that. One of the big ones was personnel. So as I said, we had some administrative personnel things to do with benefits and employment policy, staff onboarding, those kind of things. But we also started off the year with a lot of openings on our staff. And if you were at the congregational meeting in January, you remember that we kind of showed you this picture, and this is what we hoped would look like at some point when we were able to fill all these spots. So we had an opening for an administrative position. We had a family pastor opening, a youth minister opening, and a children's minister opening, and also a bookkeeper. Some of you all may know John Morrow, who has been our finance person, and the goal was that he, since he already retired once, would be able to back off his hours quite a bit, and we'd have a bookkeeper who would do the day-to-day things. And luckily, John, who's been such a blessing to us, is still going to continue to help us with some forecasting, reporting, things like that that are more bigger picture, which has really been a huge benefit for us to be able to see some of those bigger trends. And I'm happy to report that with Lindsay, our last hire, all these spots are now full. So this is what we view as a full staff for at least a while, and we're really pleased about that. So hopefully you've had a chance to meet most of these people. Chris Beck was already a member here, and she took that administrative position. We have Denise, who's our family pastor, Kayla, our youth director, and Lindsay, who just started a few weeks ago as our children's director. And then you probably haven't met Amanda, but she is our bookkeeper, so you'll see her in the very first office in there. So this happened, honestly, a little quicker than we were hoping. I think the ideal would be by the end of this year that all these positions would be full, but we were really pleased to be able to find the right people in a relatively short amount of time. So this represents what we view as a full staffing plan that gives us room to grow for the next few years. We also are really focusing on our discipleship strategy. So that means not only our adult strategy, but our children and youth. And so Denise and Kayla and now Lindsay are working hard on those strategies there. We're continuing to develop life groups. If you were there to film a few weeks ago, the end of August, we're doing a new class for those who have recently joined called Ready for More, and that will be available really soon. And available for anyone, but certainly for those people who are new to our congregation, that's really going to help them understand who we are, our core practices, how they can get involved, and how they can grow in their faith. So it's really that step 2 after you say, I want to be part of Harvard Avenue. It's kind of to help spur on what you can do to really integrate into our congregation. We're continuing to work on increasing serving opportunities, both for our children and youth and our adults, so hopefully you'll be hearing more about that. And we're working on congregational care. So if you're an elder, I think you know that you have a new reporting system, which is really helpful to our ministers to have a better sense of how people are doing. And then we're also in discussions about starting a senior ministry and what that might look like as well. So trying to continue to provide that net of care even as we grow. And I know you as the Challengers class are so good at caring for each other anyway, so we always look to you as a great example there. And then governance and policy, everyone's favorite. So we're working on financial policies. We had a new volunteer policy that we passed this year, different things like that. Which, if I had a photo up here for that, it would really be Steve Ray just sitting marking things out and writing very helpful notes in the margin of all of our policies. So we're grateful to him for that. But really what I want to talk about more today is our last initiative for this year, which was to plan for growth and to start thinking about what that might look like before we get into a position where we're out of space or out of people or out of volunteers. And so we really wanted to ask the question, what might our future look like? And this is at a time where a lot of things are changing. We know both inside our church and outside of our church that are going to affect this future. And so we kind of looked at a few different areas. We wanted to look at what might our future look like in terms of people, who will be here, who won't be here, what it might look like in terms of facilities, finances, and then how God might be calling us to use our resources and our strengths as this congregation beyond our walls and to be a leader in our region and in our denomination. So I want to start with people. This is from the 2025 Pension Fund Gathering presentation. And Kyle showed me this little pointer. Great. So you can see this is about attendance, not just at HAC, all across the country, pre-pandemic versus post-pandemic. So the first line here, you can see this is regularly attend, occasionally attend, infrequently, never. And then after spring of 2022, you can see regularly shrunk, occasionally shrunk, infrequently shrunk, and never grew. Everything shifted that way. Now, we're very grateful. We really didn't experience that for the most part. Certainly we had a dip during the pandemic, but we've seen steady growth since then. But these are some of the larger trends. This one's kind of hard to get your head around what it's showing you, but it's showing you who dropped out. So you can see over here, especially this part, this red line, those who infrequently attended, a big chunk of those dropped to never attending. And you have some shifting, some who occasionally came are now regular, some regular, occasional. But the biggest change was those people who were very loosely connected to congregations, the pandemic kind of did that connection in, and that's unfortunate. However, this is our attendance for the last 3 years. So you can see there's lots of ups and downs. Anybody want to guess what this Sunday is? No, actually, so this graph does not have Christmas or Easter. We took those out because they're just such outliers. This is the Christmas cantata the week before Christmas. And I think this one of these ones is too. These really low days, like I think there was an ice storm that day or something like that. There's things that kind of make it, but the red line that kind of goes up and down is a trailing 8-week average. And the white line that goes straight across is the trend line. And then this is 2022, 2023, and so far 2024. So we've seen really consistent growth of about 40 additional people on average for our attendance each year. So 40 higher in 2023 than 2022, 40 higher so far this year. This shows you our quarterly attendance average. So the first bar line in all of them is 2022, 2023, and 2024. So you can see that's also been pretty consistent as well. And we'll see what this final line is at the end of this year. Okay, here's another interesting thing. So we do not have birth dates for everyone in the congregation. but we have them for about half of the congregation. So this represents the birth years of half of our congregation. So we're going to extrapolate and just say that this is a good sampling of what they are. So it starts here. We have a 1923. I don't know who that is, but we have a 1923, and all the way through 2024. And if you know the Lolmans, we just added another one this week in 2024. But you can see that really the boomers right here are the big portion of our congregation. So I want to show you a little more specifically. This much is over 75 as of today. This much is over 65 as of today. Now, this is really a great thing in so many ways because we have so many people who care so deeply about our congregation, who have such history here, and who are wonderful leaders in terms of their faith and their leadership. So this is both not unusual and in many ways a strength, but it certainly has implications for what our future might look like. And it's really about 60% are these two blocks that are over 65 right now. Now I will say we are growing in all demographics, so we're getting new young families, we're getting new older adults as well, but we're growing at a bit of a higher rate still at over 65 than we are under 65. So that's sort of our people. Now we understand that that's not stagnant. Like I said, new people are coming in all the time, and there's lots that can change, but we also need to keep in mind what that means for the ministries that we need to be focusing on in the next 15 to 20 years, and what that means for what our congregation might look like as well.
What is the total number of members?
We count about 750 active members right now.
Okay, thank you.
We also wanted to look at our facilities. So we are in the process of evaluating a lot of different things with our facilities. We wanted to make sure all of our leases are in order. Some of you may not know that we actually lease this parking lot area over here from Tulsa Public Schools. We have 25 years left on that lease, but we hope at some point to be able to acquire that so that we don't have to worry about losing that land in the future. So those discussions are underway. We have a wonderful utilization study. Thanks so much to Connie. I was sorry I couldn't be here last week, but we appreciate that, of how do we use our current building? What are the spaces that get the most use? What are spaces that are being underutilized? The other thing we wanted to do was think towards the future and set what we would call maximum campus limits. What do we think is possible on this campus, both with our current buildings, but what could we build out on this campus? And the last thing is we've initiated a master site planning process. So I want to talk about those last two just a little bit more. I think it's easy to wonder, why do we care what a maximum campus limit is, right? Why not just keep going and growing until you can't do it anymore? Well, there's certainly some truth to that. We can't predict what the future will hold. Maybe some of you have dreams that HAC will be able to be seen from space someday, but for us, what we really wanted to think about was what's realistic in this location with the land that we have, without plans to gobble up buildings across the street or anything like that. But even more importantly, how do we keep our culture and our identity not exactly the same, because we're always growing and changing, but how do we keep that warmth in that community the same? And so what we really wanted to think about was what's realistic. But also we wanted to keep in mind the way that Tulsa is growing and what's a realistic commutable distance for people. So you all are probably more centralized perhaps, but I have many of my children's friends who live south of 141st Street, which is astounding to me and very irritating when I have to think about driving down there for a play day. But there are lots of people who are living much further away that probably are not ever going to drive to 54th and Harvard. And so we want to think about that as well. So this is what the ministry leadership team has agreed to, that our Sunday morning maximum capacity on this campus would be about 1,200. We think that that's the size that this land could hold. We think that's the size that we could do ministry well and still keep our identity. What that might look like would be about 1,000 people worshiping in 3 services. Might be about 200 children in our program, with about 125 on any given Sunday, 150 youth, about 100 on any given Sunday. Our goal is to have 60 life groups. We're continuing to grow there, but some of those meet off-site, and they meet at all different times during the week. Still 2 to 3 large educational opportunities on Sunday, and space for all of our community partners, as many as possible. So that's kind of what we're looking at. The reason we wanted to look at that is because as we move into discussions about what a master site plan would look like, we needed to have those numbers in mind. Now, I will still say, obviously, things might change, and the Holy Spirit might lead us in all different directions, and that's fine, but it's helpful to have something in mind to work with in the meantime. So we are initiating a master site plan process, which is asking the questions, how can we utilize the campus we have, and how can we consider further growth? And one of the things we want to make sure is that any smaller improvements we might make in the meantime are made with kind of an ultimate site plan in mind, so that we're not tearing down, that little extra addition that we built 5 years later. We want to make sure we're making wise choices. It also helps us think about how we might phase any kind of future expansion if we know what the end goal is. Now, I want to be clear, the fact that we're doing a master site plan is not a building project. We are not building anything right now. Everybody say that with me. We are not building anything right now. Do not leave this room and go tell people that I said we're doing a building project. We are not. This is going to be an architect who's going to come in and show us how we might be able to use this site to the maximum capacity, so that we can have that idea in mind as we go forward. The other thing we wanted to look at was finances and what that might look like in the future. So this is a graph that shows giving to religion from 1983 to 2023. You can see that it's actually continued to have steady growth. Here's another graph, though, that shows, this is like let's pretend this is a church, that in 2010 was receiving $150,000, 2023 is receiving $209,000. So the amount has grown, but it has not kept up with inflation. And so that's another thing that we need to keep in mind, is we can't always just look at just the dollar amounts, but we need to look at what that means in the bigger picture. Here is Harvard Avenue's giving. These are the last 3 years. 2022 is the green line. 2023 is the orange line. And this is 2024 so far, the blue line. Our budget has steadily grown over the last 3 years. You can see it follows an interesting, this is month to month, it follows an interesting pattern. It's always high at the beginning because several people choose to pay their whole pledge for the year in January, so that's why it starts off so high. But there's always this fun little bump in June, which I don't know how to explain that, but there it is. But you can see, especially this year, we've had a great year so far, and we expect to end the year in a really strong position as well. So our finances are incredibly strong. It's one of our strongest areas, and something that gratefully we don't have to worry about at this point. But we've been talking about this for a while, and I have some information. What do our giving demographics look like at Harvard Avenue? So we have total giving right now of $2.7 billion. You'll notice that does not match our budget number, because this also includes gifts that people might make to a memorial or some kind of specialized giving. So it's a little higher than what our budget is. And with that, we have 387 donor-identified givers. That means that there's a name associated with the gift. So if you just put $20 in the offering plate from time to time, we have no idea who you are. But if you write a check or put it in an envelope, that's how it's able to be identified. So I want to talk briefly about privacy. I'm going to show you a little bit of information. All of this was compiled with no names associated with giving amounts. So I want to make sure you know I have no idea who gives what. No one who's seen this data has any idea who gives what. Names and ages were done separately, and then it was split into ages and amounts. So all I know is that there's someone who's over 65 in a certain quartile. So what we did was we divided our total giving into 4 quartiles. That means if you list all the giving amounts from the highest giving amount to the lowest giving amount and divide that evenly into the 4 amounts, so about 700,000, 700,000, 700,000, 700,000. It's how many people are in each of those sections. Our first quartile, this is a quarter of our budget, comes from 5 giving units. All of them are over 60, and 3 out of 5 are over 80.
Is that individual?
So that would be a family. So it could be an individual or it could be a couple.
Wow.
Our second quartile, so now we're talking about that second 25%, has 23 giving units. 9 of them are over 75, 6 of them are 50s to 60s, 3 of them are in their 40s, and 1 is in their 30s. So this is what half of our budget looks like. I don't, because there are 387 donors, I don't have the ages on the third and fourth quartile, but there are 60 giving units in the third quartile and 299 in the fourth quartile. So that's kind of how it's spread out. Which means 50% of our giving comes from 28 individuals or families, and 70% of those 28 are over 65. Now, we've been talking about this in certain circles of discussion for a long time. This is not shocking news. The question was, how far is this distributed a certain direction, not if it is. And I think this is probably about what we expected. The fact that so much of our giving comes from just a few donors is not unusual. Even in the nonprofit world, you're going to have a few donors who make up a big chunk of the giving. That's normal. 70% of them are over 65 is probably normal in a mainline church right now as well. But it does have implications for what we see in the future. I want to just offer a few thoughts about some generational differences as we look toward the future. Now, you can get different statistics from a lot of different places, so use these as tools, not as law. But we have the baby boomers. You know that's going to be our biggest group. The baby boomers, who's a baby boomer in here? Raise your hand. Most of you, right? Yeah. So these are born between 1946 and 1964. You guys are one of the most philanthropic generations and account for close to half of all charitable contributions in the United States every year. And 72% of you are likely to give to a religious organization. Gen X is a very small generation, and the researchers don't seem to care that much about what their giving habits are, but it says that 59% give to charities, but Gen X also really prefers to volunteer their time a little bit more so in a stronger way than the baby boomers who are more likely to give. And then we have millennials who are going to be a huge percentage of the workforce very, very soon. They already are. And there's some differences there. So the average millennial says has 30% less wealth at the age of 35 than baby boomers did at the same age. However, the top 10% of millennials have 20% more wealth than the top baby boomers at that age. So there's a bigger divide. 84% of millennials give to charity, which is very high, I think, considering the age group, but it only equals 11% of total charitable giving.
What years were you consider millennials born off the top?
I'm real old, so it's 1984 to like 96, 97.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so they're all over 20 and under 40 right now, I think.
And baby boomers are 1946 to what?
To 64.
64.
Mm-hmm.
How about 3 baby boomers? We get left out?
Do you know you're called the silent generation? But that doesn't match you very well. But there's another interesting piece of that, which is that millennials will be on the receiving end of a $30 trillion wealth transfer in the next 20 years. The biggest wealth transfer that we have in our history. So there's a piece of that we can't totally predict. Now, obviously, that's not an equitable transfer across all millennials, but that's still a huge thing that's happening. Here's another fun thing. 65% of millennials prefer to give on their phone. Raise your hand if giving on your phone is your favorite way to donate to a charity. So not only do we have to think of what this means for the future, but this also has an impact on strategy, right? How do we talk about stewardship? How do we plan our stewardship? How do we reach out to some of these younger generations in ways that they're used to giving?
Does that include Venmo and your kids? Sending money?
Yeah, that includes, okay. An interesting thing is the percentage of each generation, and this includes Generation X, who give to religious organizations is very even. We actually don't see a drop that there are fewer millennials giving than boomers. But they're not giving as much as boomers, and we have to keep that in mind. So these are some sobering statistics in some ways. I think for those of us who have been talking about what our future looks like have been dancing around them for a little bit. So to have them all laid out in one place really makes us think about what does that mean for our church in the next 15 or 20 years. And in just a minute, Kyle's going to talk to you about that because he's going to be the one who figures that out for the next couple of years, not me. But no, the truth is, we don't have answers, and we don't live in a static system either. We don't know what the future holds, and we know that we have a God who has great plans for us. And whether that means that we continue to grow, or whether that means that we don't grow at the same rate, it's going to be a great future for Harvard Avenue, and we're all very confident of that, even if we can't see exactly what that future might look like. And so what we want to think about now is both personally and corporately, what does it mean to leave a legacy? And that's what Kyle's going to talk to you about in just a minute. But I also want to do another little quick plug for the endowment, because you all have been so faithful for so long. And I just want to remind you that a way that your legacy can continue is by gifts to the endowment that will continue to support the ministry of this church for years and years and years. So Hank is your person to talk to in here, or we also have Ryan Bouchon and Jason Dent, who are happy to talk to you. But I think, all of these are going to shape the conversations that we have about what our future looks like. And yet, I think we have such reason to be hopeful and to trust. We came through a pandemic, and we have been so blessed to be able to welcome so many people into this congregation who are finding their home here and finding the love of God here. And I don't think that's going to change anytime in the future. So at this point, I'd like to invite Kyle to come up and chat with you a bit. And I'm so pleased to be able to introduce Kyle to you today, and I hope that he'll have a chance to talk to you again several times in the future, but I really couldn't choose a better person to become moderator next year. He has been just a joy to work with and such a blessing to me, and I know he will be a blessing to this whole congregation as well.
While Kyle is getting his microphone set up, I would urge you, please, if you have a question, and Kyle's going to want some feedback here, please raise your hand. I've got to get the microphone to you, so your question will be recorded on the tape, okay?
Well, we're just going to put this in my pocket. How's that? How is everyone this morning? Good. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak with you today. First off, Diana said some very kind words about me a second ago. Please don't set those expectations too high. I am terrified by trying to fill her shoes. She has done an amazing job, and I've talked with the ministers at our church, the ministry team at our church, and everyone basically says they've never seen anyone as good as a moderator as Diana, and I totally couldn't agree with that more. So, thank you. And if you think that some of the statistics that Diana showed you were dour, wait till you see what I'm about to show you. I just want to highlight before I go into this, so sometimes it has to get really dark before the candlelight can really shine brightest. So the Disciples of Christ has essentially a annual sort of yearbook that's called Alex that collects statistics across the denomination. And this year's, or the most recent Alex yearbook, collected statistics from 1,650 congregations in the Disciples of Christ. So it's about half of the DOC congregations. And I think we can assume that this is, if anything, probably a optimistic estimate. The ones that aren't doing as well are less likely to actually report. So take that for what it's worth, but this should be a fairly representative, some fairly representative feedback on the state of the DOC. And here's the first thing you need to know. Of those 1,650 congregations, half of those congregations worshiped with fewer than 40 people on a Sunday. 1% worship with more than 350 people on a Sunday. So you can already see where Harvard Avenue sits in that distribution. So here's the distribution. So you can see here, I actually did the math this morning. This actually adds up to 99%. So there's some rounding, but basically you have the vast majority of Disciples of Christ churches are in the 150 or less range. Here's the actual distribution of the top 100 churches. And you can see where Harvard Avenue sits. Harvard Avenue is actually number 16 on the list nationally. There are a handful of churches that are very large, and then you can see here this begins to drop off, and after you get past 100, it really bottoms out. So Harvard Avenue is the average worship attendance this past year, or this year so far, is 422. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, given all the demographic shifts that Diana was talking about, what do we foresee for the future? What's going to happen to this distribution? Do we think this distribution, the tail, is going to spread out? Do we think the distribution is going to pull in and you're going to have an even smaller number of much larger churches? And I think that's an open question. A companion statistic that I think is also really important for reasons that you'll see here in a minute is the average age of the clergy. So the median age of clergy within the Disciples of Christ is 59 years. So as of most recent counting here in 2019 and 2020, you had about 8% of the clergy that were under 40 years of age, and about 48% that were more than 60 years of age. And that's 4 or 5 years ago. So what that suggests is that by this point, by 2024, we are getting close to a place where about half of the clergy are going to be retiring very soon. I'm looking at you, Reverend Kidwell. You gotta give us more, right? Get to work. I'm also really glad that you're here because you may be able, actually, particularly well positioned to comment on some of these shifts that are happening in the Christian church. So, taking all of that and putting it together, Diana actually is the one who made this observation. Our church went through a vision process in the last couple of years, and we put together a document that is the vision document that is supposed to guide this church for the next decade. And the last lines of the vision document say that eventually our calling will go beyond the realm of this campus. In 5 years, we will have begun plans to expand beyond our campus. We will also have an active program to train and develop future leaders. And I think it stretches the imagination to think that those of us on the vision team are that prescient and wise to have foreseen these statistics. I think it's probably something else that guided that. And part of what we wanted to do this morning was to put these stats on your radar screen to get you thinking about the wider church and where the Disciples of Christ sits right now, and where it might be 10 or 15 years from now, and what Harvard Avenue's role in that could be. Diana talked about the finances. This church is in very strong financial position compared to most churches. I mean, if the metaphor I kind of have in my mind as I look out there is that, most Disciples of Christ churches are like dinghies floating in the ocean, and many of them are going down. They're rubber or made of wood sort of tacked together, and they're just basically sort of trying to stay afloat. And here we are, and we're in basically what amounts to a battleship. We are in very solid position. But then the question that begs is then what is our responsibility, right? What is it, if you were on the ocean and you were in a battleship and you saw all of these folks hanging on to rafts, what would you do? And that's what we have to ask ourselves. So this part of the presentation is not supposed to be about me just talking. There's a lot of wisdom and there's a big brain trust in this room. And what I want to do is I want to give some space for you guys to generate ideas and to talk about, in light of what we've just shown you, ideas for how Harvard Avenue can meet that need. What is it that we can do? So, first off, I guess a great place to begin is to simply ask the question, what does it make you, when you see this and you see this, what does it make you think? Yeah.
It just seems to me that our search committees have been so successful in getting the most spiritually engaged ministers, so that we grow because of Mark Briley's, or even Bob Peake, many years ago was sent out to start this church. And of course David now. I mean, to me, I think our growth is built upon that senior minister, and even Kevin and everyone else. We just have great leadership in the search committees to bring in top-notch ministers, because I think that's what brings people to church.
Yep. And to that point, we have an embarrassment of riches at this church in terms of people who can go in the pulpit. But remember, that search committee, their job gets a whole lot easier when they're trying to attract candidates to this church, right? To a church that's at this place in the distribution, and that it's as dynamic as this church. We've got... Yeah.
I'm wondering about the formats, because we see young people don't want to come to church. I mean, that's pretty obvious. So how do we grow our church in a way that is comfortable for them? I always think about the early church. We met in homes, or they met in homes. They worshiped together. We have a small group format now that we're trying to strengthen, but I'm almost thinking that in the future the small group may be a more acceptable, more palatable situation for younger people. Just wondering.
Yeah? What were you going to say, Kay?
I have belonged to 5 congregations of Disciples of Christ in 3 different states. And it's my observation that the churches that care for the older people are good, but your emphasis has to be on families. There's no doubt about it. And if you can get the older people involved in encouraging the young people, that's the best of both worlds.
Yep, absolutely. A lot of times if you can get the younger, I mean, how many folks in here want to go to church with their grandkids? Yeah, right? People are going to throw their arms out of their sockets. Their arms are going to go up so fast, right? A lot of times if you can focus on younger people and young families, you will pull in other demographics as well. But a key to that is just your point about being an intergenerational church. David talks about this, and I think it's not just a multi-generational, but an intergenerational. It suggests an interaction between generations. I would just make a plug for Kayla in this respect, that she needs you guys involved with the youth. I know those teenagers may terrify you. All right, they terrify me. And in about an hour and a half, I'm going to take Tabitha for her driving test. Okay, talk about terror. Just stay off the roads this afternoon, folks. But they will benefit from having you in their lives. Kayla will benefit, and that program will benefit from having you just be present with her. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to piggyback on that just a little bit, because I was thinking about it, and working on search, of course, for the search team for the family minister, the children's minister, youth minister. I learned so much about being at the table at those meetings with the younger people. I think one of the keys of this church at this point, I see it, we all talk about it, we're two separate groups. For the most part, the traditional service is our group. And I know there's a little bit of intermingling, but not much. And then, of course, the younger group, they're meeting while we are in here. I think we've got to be able to have some synergism as a church between intergenerational groups. Be that some small groups, be at these dinners we're talking about, but we have to get to know each other to be able to use the talents of everyone. Yes, there's a lot of a brain trust, you said, and there's a lot of legacy and history in this church that is rich. But unless that's passed on to the younger people, they don't have that, and we want them to have that. So we have got to have more intergenerational contact with each other.
I think that's a great suggestion. It's something that in the coming year we need to think about ways to facilitate. I do think the small groups are key. When you're thinking about a small group to join, don't just think about joining a small group that looks like you, right? That's at the same place in life that you're at. Branch out. Other thoughts? Yeah.
Kyle, and to answer your question about what do I think about when I see the graphs that you show up there, it seems like to me it would be important to know and understand why it is that so many churches are in a state of decline and they're not having attendance such as we have. On the other hand, I think it would also be important to know and understand all the reasons why we are outliers to that trend, in order to be sure we don't keep or make the same mistakes that have been made by other congregations.
Yeah, I think that's key, and I would offer as one element of many explanations for that is that this church has shown a remarkable flexibility. This church is willing and has shown itself over and over again to be something different than what it has always been. And I think that is a key, that sort of ability to evolve and adapt is key to survival as individuals, and I think it's key to survival as an institution. And that goes to your point. Who was it that made this point? Point about needing to think about what types of formats are important. Diana mentioned there's so much growth going down south. There are a lot of families that would benefit from a church like this one. There are some very unique characteristics about this church that we can talk about separately. That those families would benefit from a church like this, but it's just hard to go from 144th, or 141st Street South all the way up to here, and to do that on a Wednesday night, right? To do that even on a Sunday. And so we may need to think about ways that we can adapt what Harvard Avenue looks like and where Harvard Avenue is, where it looks like, right? This is the core. We are not, let's repeat it again, we are not building, this is not a building plan, okay? But we may need to think about how we partner with some of those churches that are struggling. We may need to think about ways that our church can bring in young ministers and mentor those young ministers as they plant and grow churches in other places, or build satellites for Harvard Avenue. Yeah, Dr.
First of all,
Kidwell.
I want to say amen to what you said. Unfortunately, I've had a front row seat to many of those congregations that have closed. In looking at their history, you can almost identify the turning points, and it all had to do with leadership. This is a perfect illustration of why disciples in Phillips Theological Seminary need you and a partnership with you. Healthy congregations produce healthy leaders. And Phillips Seminary needs healthy people. I mean, unhealthy people, frankly, you can't, you sort of can't teach leadership. But healthy congregations produce healthy leaders. And so I just want to say thank you, because amen to your calling will have an impact throughout the entire denomination. So thank you.
Yeah, our legacy will extend beyond just this particular part of Harvard Avenue, right? Okay, I think we are basically out of time. We have 3 minutes. Anything else? Yeah, sure. No, please.
So my gripe is a cultural gripe. It's a society gripe. Mm-hmm. I have a neighborhood full of young people who play soccer, baseball, or something else on Sunday morning.
Yep.
So that means that if you have a superstar athlete, like I do in my family, I have 2 young women, wonderful athletes, who are probably playing volleyball right now.
Yep.
And I don't know why. I guess I don't like the idea of church and state as one, but I don't like the idea that in order to be a successful young person and be an athlete, you miss church every Sunday because you're off at a soccer tournament. I'm sorry, just had to gripe. Because when I open my windows today, I see the cars next door heading off to soccer fields with their kids. And that's very irritating when you're trying to grow a youth program.
Yeah, just ask Kayla. No, you're absolutely right, but this goes to what I was saying earlier about, can we be something different than what we've always been? Last time I checked, the Bible doesn't say that all teenagers need to go to church on Sunday morning.
I'm feeling better now, thank you.
Right? And no, your comment is exactly right, and it's one that we've talked about, and it's something, I mean, I got 3 kids, they're swim team and basketball team, and they're all over the place, and you want to pull your hair out, and it's really hard to balance the extracurriculars and church. And this isn't a family that's super committed to going to church, okay? Imagine the family that's kind of on the line, right? You're asking them to make that sacrifice. That doesn't sort of fit the idea as come as you are to church. So basically, we're going to need to go to them as they are and find other ways to pull those families in. And that's going to require creativity, it's going to require flexibility, it's going to require Kayla thinking outside the box and us supporting her in doing that. But I think that point that you just made is actually one of the major obstacles to growing the number of young families in our church. Yeah. All right. Thank you all. I really appreciate it. And we will continue this conversation over the next couple of years.